I would like to remind everybody, a few days ago, everybody was doom posting and saying that Sakamoto Days is going to be an absolute dumpster fire and a failure of an anime. I made a video talking about this, talking about the opening reveal. For instance, the entirety of the world finally got to see the opening, and overall, everybody's reactions to the opening was pretty negative. Obviously, there were some that remained very optimistic, but it was very overwhelmingly negative towards Sakamoto Days because the opening was legitimately lackluster. Now, I did talk about in my video a few days ago that I do agree that the opening does feel very early 2010-ish. It doesn't feel like what you would usually get in the 2020s, but it didn't necessarily mean that the anime was going to be quote-unquote terrible. And everybody was quick to just say that the series was going to be garbage before the first episode aired. But the amount of people that I have seen just swap sides and do a complete 180 after this episode aired earlier this morning is some pretty wild stuff. I have legitimately seen non-stop praise by the very individuals that were slandering Sakamoto Days all on the internet a few days ago. It's wild how stuff like that happens. It's like people judging a book by its cover, or in this case, judging an anime by its opening song, and not waiting until the episode actually airs. Now, there is some critique to be made about the opening, and I'll talk about that in a second, but overall, from what I have witnessed personally after watching this first episode of Sakamoto Days, it is an excellent first episode. I think legitimately anyone that was worried and actually went in and is willing to suck up their pride and admit they're wrong will legitimately say that, yeah, this was an amazing episode. Probably the best episode of anime that aired today. I mean, we had Soul Leveling that came out as well. Very good episode, but I will say that Sakamoto Days won me over because there was a lot of things about this that just feel refreshing or relatable to a degree. I especially love the origin story of Sakamoto Taro, you know, getting to see how he became who he is or what he was to where he's at now in life. It's legitimately something that I really enjoy. I'll talk about the premise and stuff in a moment, but what I'm trying to say is that the first episode overall, if you were someone that was worried thanks to the opening song, like you thought it was going to be an absolute failure of a show, you don't have to worry. It's legitimately an incredible first episode. The choreography, which is one of the biggest staples of Sakamoto Days' manga, is legitimately really good in this as well. Obviously, you could probably argue, if you're really wanting to nitpick, you probably could argue and say the manga looks better, but at the same time, I always talk about this. The thing about a manga, the reason why sometimes it looks better than, let's say, the anime equivalent, is because you have an author that is able to dedicate a lot of time into one page or a panel, while the animators that work on this, they're having to put a whole movement and sequence, so obviously some things won't look as good because you have one frame that's being drawn and focused on, while you have literally hundreds upon hundreds and thousands of frames within a single episode. So when you factor it in, it makes sense, but the flow and the choreography of the flowing of the movement is really good, and I think that they definitely nailed it, especially with some of these action sequences within this episode, which does bring to question a lot of things. It makes me really wonder what Netflix and the people that were advertising Sakamoto Days was actually thinking when they were advertising in the first place. Let's get into that. It's a perfect segue to really get into that negative aspect, since obviously that was the big talk of the town for the last few days. So Sakamoto Days obviously had quite a up and down few days. I mean, the opening song legitimately, let's be honest, not a lot of people liked it. I mean, even myself included, I said that, the opening was okay. It's not an opening that I personally vibe with. I'm gonna be blunt with you. I would skip it. I would skip this opening. Now, I'm not saying the song is bad or anything. It just comes down to acquired taste. But this is something I would watch once, and I would skip over the opening to get to the content. I'm just gonna be completely blunt. Now, the ending song, however, I really like the ending song. Like, the ending song's really good. Like, it definitely, I'd mesh more with that completely. But back into the topic of the opening really, it makes me wonder what they were thinking, because obviously the designs and stuff of the way the opening is depicted, it reminds me, like I said, of early 2010s anime, and it feels so old school, it's gonna turn off a lot of people from watching it. So let's be honest, you know, anime is gaining more and more popularity as time goes on. It is gaining more and more sales globally, and I mean, thanks to recent hits and how spoiled people have gotten from, let's say, Demon Slayer to Jujutsu Kaisen, Bison, to Chainsaw Man, to Fate Stay Night, all these different type of things over the years. Obviously, there is a lot of people that are spoiled with, like, animation and art. I mean, you constantly see these big series trending and all that, and people have come to expect, you know, that type of stuff, that type of quality all the time. The line, you know, the actual barrier has been set, and if you don't reach that, then people really don't want to mess with your series. That's what a lot of people feel like. If it is just average or a slightly above average art and animation, people will legitimately think that it's an absolutely dumpster fire of a show. That's the truth. Sadly, that is the reality we live in. A lot of people judge their overall impressions of a show just based on the art and animation. Now, obviously, it is a big part of it because, you know, an anime is supposed to have animation art, but, you know, usually if it is not, like, always wowing you and jingling keys in front of you, so to speak, with dopamine hit, people legitimately are kind of turned away from the show. So, the opening in general is something that really is different because it's like, it's not that, you know, what we've gotten used to in the last few years. Like, you look at Dawn to Dawn's opening, you look at Chainsaw Man's opening, you look at, you know, Jujutsu Kaisen's opening, you see the dopamine hits with the way the songs are done to the art and animation, but this opening just feels very methodical and slow paced and all that. It just feels very traditional, which is not a problem. Honestly, it's really not a problem. But like I said, it was not a good way to advertise the show, especially when it was one of the first real good looks at the way the show would look in a few days. And then on top of that, you have like big leakers within, you know, social media saying that Sakamoto Days is going to be something that's kind of which is already sending alarm bells to a lot of people. It's just crazy, honestly, just to see the 180 from so many people in these last few hours. But, now, with that being said, I will say that whatever happened with Sakamoto Days, with the advertisement and all that, they really need to get their game together. Like, they really need to figure out what's going on there, because they almost damaged this show beyond repair. Like, it was possible they could have damaged Sakamoto Days to the point where nobody would have watched it. But thankfully, people gave it a shot, and people were like, I'm not going to let the opening decide if I want to really not watch the show or not, and I'm glad a lot of people gave it a shot. But, let's back up away from that, and let's actually get into the synopsis of Sakamoto Days. So, Sakamoto Days, overall, the first episode is legitimately very simple. It is an extremely simple plot, but it's executed very well. And that is what I think makes a lot of people fall in love with Sakamoto Days, the manga included, but also why I think Sakamoto Days is doing very good today. Because it tells a very traditional story, which I think plays in line with the opening, why it was done like that. But it has a traditional story where you have, like, a legendary individual, either a hitman, killer, or whatever, that one day, you know, he just ceases to exist. For instance, he just falls off the grid, he's no longer a hitman or killer anymore, or assassin, and, you know, he falls in love, he starts a family, and then he has a whole new life. Eventually, someone from that same organization finds him and all that. It's like, what you doing here? You've let yourself go, you're fat, all that type of stuff. And as things go on, you know, it's revealed that just because he is forgive me, I got a cold, but, just because he's, looks different, he's definitely put on a lot more weight, doesn't mean that his skills have necessarily dulled a lot. He might be slightly weaker than he used to be, but not by much. He's still a legendary assassin for a reason. And so basically the plot is a man that is retired, basically, and, you know, is just trying to live a happy life because he fell in love, he has a kid and all that, and he's being forced out of retirement to be able to get back into the biz once again. Now, he isn't necessarily, quote-unquote, being an assassin anymore or a hitman. That's not what happens in this, but he's forced to deal with those situations once again because people from his previous work life are coming to find him, which is true. Like, when you're in that type of work life, when you're in, like, organizations that are very shady or evil or whatever, or just getting rid of people, you can't just walk away from that. That's not something you can do, no matter your status within that said society or that organization and world. So it makes sense why people would always be hunting after him. It also makes sense why Sakamoto has, like, a lot of weapons on hand and stuff secret, because it shows that he's prepped for anything, because obviously with him settling down, him having a family, it puts his family at risk. His family is definitely a huge target. There's going to be people that are not going to just target Sakamoto, they're going to target his, you know, wife and kid. So when you factor all that in, it makes sense why he's still probably training or keeping his skills in check, because he knows that any day something like that can happen. And so I do appreciate this. There is a realistic nature to the unrealism of this first episode, and I like that. Like I said, it's a very simplistic plot, and it's not something that obviously breaks any molds or changes the game or anything like that, but there's nothing wrong with that. That you don't need to have, like, a completely just, like, deconstruction of shonen or deconstruction of media to have a very good series. Sakamoto Days is a perfectly niche series that, is about a hitman that's retired. Nothing wrong with that. It's really good. Like I said, it's executed perfectly, honestly. I would dare say that I couldn't have asked for a better first episode. I mean, it's been a while since I read the first chapter of Sakamoto Days, I'm not going to lie, so I don't know the core differences from this episode and the chapter. I will be completely blunt there. But I will say that, from what I remember, it's pretty solid. Very solid first episode. I can definitely see why, it's becoming popular. Will this become as popular as, like, Dawn to Dawn from last season? We'll see. I don't think I've seen as much buzz. Could be wrong there. Maybe it's just me. But, yeah. But I do think that Sakamoto Days definitely is on the way up. It is moving up, and it is not a colossal failure as some would have you believe. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. May all of you have a fantastic day or night wherever you live. Be safe, stay healthy. Chibi out.